You know, the show's been going for a little while. I can't speak as to everybody else, but there are things in my life that are definitely more, you know, I'm closer to 60 than 50. I had an accident a few years back that you got to witness on the show.
In 2017, Sue Aikens filed a $500,000 lawsuit that nearly destroyed life below zero. The documents exposed faked wolf attacks, staged bear encounters, and a crash that shattered her collarbone in 10 places. But the most shocking detail was a single word executives used to describe her: expendable. What viewers didn't know was that for years, Sue had been fighting battles off-camera that were far more dangerous than anything Alaska could throw at her. And when she finally spoke out, she revealed secrets that made 1/3 of the audience threaten to quit watching. Sue Aikens was born on July 6, 1963, in Mount Prospect, Illinois, during one of the hottest weeks of that summer. Her mother, Nyoka, was only 19 years old and not ready to raise a child. She had dropped out of school to marry Sue's father, who worked long hours at a local factory. They lived in a small apartment on Elm Street, where most of the money went straight to rent. Sue's father came home late, covered in grease and too tired to talk. Nyoka stayed home, smoking and watching soap operas, sometimes forgetting to feed her baby. Neighbors often knocked on the door, complaining about the crying. Nobody really listened. So even before she could talk, Sue started learning that if she wanted to survive, she'd have to figure things out on her own. When she was just over 2 years old, everything cracked. One night, during a fight, her father hurled a coffee mug at the wall, shattering it inches from Nyoka's head. That was the breaking point. The divorce that followed dragged on for months. Sue watched her mom count coins on the table just to buy groceries. After court, Nyoka got only $45 a month in child support. They had to move above a laundromat, where the machines rumbled day and night. Nyoka waited tables for barely more than $1 an hour, and Sue was left with neighbors who sometimes forgot she was even there. She taught herself how to climb up the kitchen counters to reach food, usually crackers or peanut butter. Some nights, when things got desperate, Nyoka would take Sue out after stores closed to dig through dumpsters for vegetables. That's how Sue learned. Survival isn't always pretty, and sometimes you take what the world throws away just to keep going. At age 3, Nyoka remarried. The man's name was Eddie, and he drank more beer than anyone Sue had ever seen. A whole case, every day. Most of their money went into cans of Budweiser. Sue was barely tall enough to see over the kitchen table when it happened. Eddie got drunk one night, furious over a burnt dinner, and stabbed a knife into the table 17 times. Sue crawled under her bed and didn't move for over 4 hours. She held a stuffed rabbit and tried not to cry. A week later, Eddie smashed her tricycle down the stairs during another one of his rages. She never got another one. Over time, Sue began to recognize the signs: how Eddie's hands shook just before he exploded, how his voice dropped before yelling. Those instincts, built in a tiny apartment soaked in fear, would later help her face much deadlier threats in the wild. When Sue turned 4, she started preschool. That's when people began noticing something wasn't quite right. Her teachers saw that she couldn't read like the others. Letters flipped and danced on the page. Simple words like cat or dog didn't make any sense to her. After some tests, she was diagnosed with dyslexia. Reading time became her worst nightmare. She would guess randomly, hoping to get it right. A boy named Tommy started calling her Stupid Sue, and by the end of the week, everyone joined in. During a parent meeting, Sue tried writing her name, but the letters came out backwards and jumbled. Her mother cried in front of the class. While other kids played outside, Sue sat in a small room for extra help every day. That pain, the shame of feeling left behind, pushed her in a different direction. She decided if she couldn't be smart on paper, she'd become strong in life. Physical survival didn't require spelling. Just before turning 5, Sue's family moved out of the city and into a broken-down farmhouse in Woodstock. It had 3 acres of wild woods and an old well that could swallow a person whole. Her mother took a job at a chicken plant and worked long shifts. Left alone, Sue wandered into the woods. She made traps from shoelaces and boxes and caught her first mouse that summer. When she got lost one afternoon, she spent over 6 hours in the forest, drinking from puddles and eating berries. She figured out how to tell direction by watching the sun and following animal tracks. One day, she tried to grab a raccoon from a hollow log and ended up in the hospital with 3 nasty cuts that needed 8 stitches, but none of it scared her. If anything, it made her feel alive. That raw feeling, that rush, she craved it. And even at that young age, she knew she'd chase that feeling for the rest of her life. When Sue turned 11, her mother made a decision that changed everything. One night, around 2 in the morning, she walked into the kids' room, threw grocery bags at them, and said, "Pack, we're moving to Alaska." By 3 a.m., they were on the road. No explanations, just gone. They ended up in a remote village north of Fairbanks, where nothing felt familiar. Sue went from city sidewalks to frozen wilderness, and it forced her to grow up fast. At 13, she was learning to fly a small plane. That was the alternative to driver's ed in Alaska. She finished high school early, but had to go back later for an Alaska history course to officially graduate. Her mom, now in her 80s, stayed quiet about those years, and Sue rarely blames her out loud. But the truth was clear. By the time she was a teenager, Sue had been abandoned, left to figure out how to stay alive in a place where winter could kill you if you weren't ready. By 17, Sue had returned to Illinois for a while and worked at Tony's Diner in Chicago. That's where she met Eddie Mallory. He came in every Tuesday for coffee and pie. He was older, 25, a construction worker making good money building apartments. They dated for only 47 days before eloping. Sue dropped out of school and followed him, hoping this time would be different. They moved to Fairbanks in 1981, chasing pipeline jobs. They rented a small cabin and lived cheaply, but the isolation and Eddie's drinking turned the place into a cage. One night, after a fight, he slammed her into the wood stove, leaving a scar that never faded. He began tracking her movements, controlling her schedule, cutting her off from everyone. She was alone again, this time even farther from help. In early 1982, Sue found out she was pregnant. At first, she thought the baby would bring peace. But during a fight, Eddie punched her in the stomach. She went into labor at just 32 weeks. Their daughter, Joanna, weighed only 3 pounds and had to stay in the NICU for 47 days. Medical bills piled up. Sue never pressed charges, terrified Eddie would leave for good, but the guilt stuck. Joanna grew up with breathing problems and developmental delays. Sue blamed herself, even though it wasn't her fault. A year later, Eddie started getting terrible headaches. At first, doctors ignored it. Then, an MRI showed the truth. A brain tumor, stage 4. Sue became his caregiver. She gave him morphine injections, fed him, cleaned him, and worked overnight shifts at a truck stop to pay the bills. Over 14 months, he wasted away until he was skin and bones. On February 18, 1985, he died with Sue holding his hand. She was just 22 years old. The funeral was small. The grief was not. She sold everything they owned for a little over $8,000 and bought a one-way ticket to the edge of nowhere. Her first stop was Kotzebue. No roads, just wild land. She pitched a tent near the river with a rifle and not much else. On the third night, a rabid wolf crept into her camp. She tried to shoot, but missed. Out of bullets, she grabbed a tent pole and tied a knife to it. After a brutal fight, she killed the animal. That wolf was her test, and she passed. She skinned it herself and traded the pelt for food. The locals began to respect her. She wasn't just another outsider. She was a survivor. Sue Aikens was only 23 when she walked straight into the frozen jaws of Alaska's wilderness. It was 1986, and she had just begun working as a fur trapper in the Brooks Range. Every day before sunrise, she set out alone into the biting cold with 50 snares to lay, walking over 15 miles in deep snow while temperatures hit 40 degrees. There were no shortcuts. She'd check each trap one by one, sometimes crawling through drifts waist-high. When she caught a lynx or wolverine, she had to skin it immediately, even if her hands were so numb she couldn't feel the knife slicing. Sometimes she slept in snow caves just to survive the night. By the time trapping season ended, she made around $2,000 total, barely enough to cover expenses. But every frozen mile taught her something new about staying alive, and every scar was a step toward becoming unbreakable. A year later, Sue did something no one saw coming. She learned how to fly and became one of Alaska's youngest female bush pilots. She flew an old Cessna 172 across the Arctic, delivering cargo to remote villages. In March 1988, a whiteout hit mid-flight, and her plane slammed into a frozen river at 80 miles per hour. The crash broke 3 ribs and shattered the windshield. She had no choice but to crawl from the wreck in 35-degree feet south cold and splint her ribs with duct tape. For 3 days, she waited, then somehow patched the plane's propeller with wire and flew it out herself. Before she saw a doctor, she delivered the cargo, medicine for a sick child. The scars stayed, and so did a limp, but she kept flying. In 1989, she took a cooking job at the oil fields in Prudhoe Bay. She cooked for 100 roughnecks working double shifts, battling heat from the industrial ovens while the wind outside froze everything solid. But the real threat wasn't the cold, it was the men. One of them, a foreman named Chuck, grabbed her during prep. She didn't flinch. Holding a 400-degree skillet inches from his face, she warned him once. The harassment didn't stop after that. Lewd drawings, sabotaged meals, insults, but she endured it all. She slept with a knife under her pillow and kept a loaded .44 Magnum in plain sight. She finished the contract and left with $8,000, but she never forgot what it taught her about isolation and danger. Not long after, she started a guiding service. Wealthy clients paid for 10-day hunts in the Arctic, and she led them herself. One drunk businessman from Milwaukee fell 15 feet off a cliff while trying to show off. Sue found him hanging upside down, unconscious and bleeding. She had no rope, so she climbed down with bare hands and dragged him up, dislocating her shoulder in the process. She still guided the hunt for 6 days with her arm in a sling. He later sued her. She sued back and won $12,000. That was the last time she let an intoxicated client into the wild with her. In 1992, lightning destroyed a cabin she'd rented. Instead of quitting, she rebuilt it by hand. She worked 18-hour days for 6 weeks straight, hauling 200-pound logs, catching fish for meals, eating berries, and trapping small game. She lost 25 pounds and suffered infections from blisters. Still, she finished the cabin. A local paper ran a story on her. Woman builds cabin alone in wilderness. That small piece of media was the first time anyone noticed just how unstoppable Sue really was. The following year, she leased a rundown oil camp near the Kavik River. It cost her just $1 a year, a deal that almost sounded fake. The place was crawling with garbage and bears. Within days, a black bear charged her from the fog. She'd later name him Marty. That encounter made it clear she wasn't just cleaning up a mess. She was walking into a war zone. But she stayed. She cleared the land herself, cleaned up 42,000 acres, and got to work turning the ruins into something livable. By 1995, Kavik had 10 tent platforms and made $50,000 a year from oil workers and hunters. Sue built a sauna from scrap metal, but the first time she used it, she burned herself badly. Second-degree burns wrapped her legs. She fixed the design with insulation and carried on. Guests loved it. That's how it always was with Sue. She got hurt first, so no one else had to. During the oil boom of 1997, she expanded the camp to 20 buildings, but more people meant more risk. One assistant she hired tried to assault her in the cookhouse. She fought him off and fired him instantly. After that, she installed bear-proof locks, not just to stop animals, but people. She never hired lightly again. Trust was a currency too expensive for her to spend. In 1999, the state of Alaska tried to take Kavik back. They claimed she'd violated her lease by investing too much, over $100,000. In court, she showed them photos of her hands, bloodied and cracked from years of work. The judge sided with her. She stayed, but the fight wasn't over. She always knew the land could be taken any time. By 2001, she had made Kavik self-sufficient with solar panels. It cut her fuel use from 250 gallons a day to just 10 a week. But that year also brought disaster. A flood destroyed half her supplies. Instead of giving up, she rebuilt with driftwood the river had left behind. She never waited for help. Nature knocked her down, and she built back stronger using what it gave her. Then came July 10, 2007. At 3:30 p.m., while pumping water, she set down her rifle. Just 15 feet away, a 1,000-pound grizzly charged. She had 4 seconds to react. It knocked her out, dragged her 30 feet, and mauled her for 20 minutes. It bit her arms 17 times, tore the scalp from her head, and crushed part of her skull. She survived by playing dead and by soiling herself, a tactic native elders had taught her. The bear eventually walked off. She was left alone, bleeding, with 40% of her body torn up. She crawled 75 yards to her rifle. With her hands ruined, she used her teeth to chamber a round and fired into the air. Then she stitched her own head shut with fishing line, duct-taped her arms, and reset her hip by slamming it against a fuel barrel. Over 10 days, she kept the camp running. Guests came and went, never knowing their host had nearly died. She cooked, guided trips, and smiled for their cameras while checking her infected wounds with a mirror and living on protein bars. They left 5-star reviews. She nearly left in a body bag. That attack changed everything. Her story spread. By 2008, she got a $180,000 insurance payout and built bear-proof fences. She turned her near death into a business. Survival tours, $2,500 a head, 6-month waitlist. Discovery Channel called in 2012. They put her on TV. Life Below Zero paid her $60,000 per season. Fame came, but the trauma stayed. She still hears the bear's breath in her dreams and keeps guns near every bed. Between 2008 and 2010, she built a wind turbine from old aircraft parts. She climbed 50-foot poles in 50 wind. One gust knocked her down and shattered her ankle. She splinted it with birch and rope, then finished the job. The turbine saved her $8,000 a year. She proved that you could live off the land even where nothing lives. In 2011, the state audited her. They claimed she'd underreported income and demanded $15,000 in back taxes. She had to sell her grandmother's wedding ring and pearl necklace to pay the fine. She testified in court, explaining how she tracked every dollar, how she worked 80-hour weeks skinning game and fueling generators in 60-degree nights. She eventually won the appeal, but the lesson stuck. The paperwork almost destroyed what the wilderness couldn't. And then, in 2012, a wolf pack surrounded one of her clients. The hunter froze. Sue didn't. She stepped in front and fired a shot into the sky. One wolf slashed her leg. With no help for miles, she dumped gunpowder into the wounds and lit it. The burns sealed the gashes. It was the most painful half-hour of her life. The hunter called it the most badass thing he'd ever seen. The scars are still there, just like all the others. In 2012, a group of National Geographic producers flew over the icy wilds of Alaska looking for something different. Not actors, not drama queens, but real people who actually lived the life other survival shows only pretended to capture. That's when they stumbled upon Sue Aikens, running her lonely Kavik River camp, 197 miles north of the Arctic Circle. When she first appeared on screen in 2013, she didn't arrive with flair or fanfare. Instead, she showed herself gutting an 800-pound bull moose using an old hunting knife, casually explaining how her camp cost $500,000 a year to operate. In the background, snow whipped through the air as she sliced meat from bone, saved every organ, and stuffed the choicest cuts into her permafrost cellar, where she kept 2,000 pounds of meat frozen for the brutal months ahead. She even spoke about using moose blood as an iron supplement, her tone so calm it startled the audience more than the visuals. Viewers were used to survival shows with hair and makeup, danger cues, and scripted thrills. But Sue, she didn't even let the crew fake a moment. Her knife was real. Her work was endless. Her camp generator buzzed in the background while she eyed the weather for incoming supply planes. By the time the first season ended in 2013, over 1 million people were tuning in every episode. Her scenes of dragging 200-pound caribou across the ice, alone, with nothing but a rope and a makeshift sled, hit hard. What most didn't know was that behind the scenes, Sue was fighting battles of her own. Producers wanted action, bears, crashes, life-threatening chaos. She refused every time. She insisted they film her real 16-hour days, checking solar panels, fixing generators, prepping for storms, maintaining radio contact, and when they pushed back, she threatened to quit. One episode captured her repairing a burst water pipe in -40, hands numb, tools freezing in minutes. She talked the viewers through each step, and that unscripted rawness became the most watched segment of the season. No dramatics, just a woman in freezing silence, doing what needed to be done. By 2015, she was being paid $40,000 per season. Not celebrity money, but enough to reflect the loyalty she had built. That year, something happened that made the internet explode. With no supply deliveries for 6 weeks and no deodorant left, Sue reached for something unthinkable. She sprayed her armpits with bear spray, on camera, then explained it wasn't for fun. Capsaicin kills odor-causing bacteria. 8 minutes of laughter, pain, science, and the grit of a woman who figured things out no matter what. Audiences loved it. Ratings jumped by 20%. That wasn't the first time she'd done it either. She said she discovered it back in 1992 during a brutal winter with no resupplies. That one scene turned into a meme, a survival hack, a talking point in forums and fan pages across the country. But the next year, things took a dark turn. In 2016, Sue's camp lease was suddenly under review by state authorities who wanted to enforce new environmental restrictions. If they succeeded, the camp and her way of life would be gone. What viewers saw wasn't just survival anymore, it was confrontation. Sue met with state officials in bitter cold, presenting documents proving her camp pumped $180,000 a year into the local economy through jobs, supplies, and flights. She dared the officials to survive one winter in Kavik before they judged her. Instead of closing her down, they compromised. Seasonal inspections, not shutdowns. Her refusal to back down earned her a People's Choice nomination and a business boost. She started selling branded survival gear and guides. In the first year alone, her merchandise raked in $320,000. By 2019, in Season 10, Sue had become a mentor to other cast members like the Hailstones. She taught them to eat raw seal blubber, showing how just 4 ounces could fuel a day's survival. Cameras rolled as she sliced through the fat, swearing like a sailor and refusing to tone it down for TV. Her language was so raw, editors had to bleep her 47 times in a single 20-minute segment. But she refused to be filtered. This was real Alaska, she said, not a theme park. Then came the crash. February 23, 2015. A snow machine, overflow ice. A producer named Aaron Melman insisted she hit 60 miles per hour across a patch of ice she'd warned was too dangerous. She obeyed against her better judgment. She crashed. The machine hit a ridge. She flew off. Her collarbone shattered in 10 places. Her shoulder ripped open. It was a disaster. But worse than the crash was what came after. The producers made her wait 4 hours before evacuation, just so they could film extra B-roll. While she bled and froze at -20, they handed her a mic and kept rolling. She walked nearly a mile to the rescue plane, each step a scream. She ended up with third-degree frostbite on her face and skin grafts from her thigh to repair the damage. 2 years later, in 2017, she sued them, BBC Worldwide, National Geographic, and Melman. The documents revealed she had 14 titanium screws and 2 plates holding her shoulder together. She asked for $500,000. Her lawsuit exposed more than just the crash. It revealed faked wolf attacks, staged bear encounters, scripted panic, all against her contract. She argued this wasn't reality TV anymore. It was deliberate endangerment. She won a settlement in 2018, but it came with strings. She was banned from Season 6 and 7. When she returned in 2019, she dropped a bombshell on Joe Rogan's podcast. Executives had called her expendable. That word caught fire online. Fans launched petitions. 1/3 of the audience threatened to quit the show unless things changed. And while legal clauses kept her quiet, she decided to speak anyway. By 2020, she was testifying before Alaska legislators, pushing for safety laws in reality TV. She told them the crash had cost her over $100,000 in lost income. Her stories weren't isolated. Other reality cast members had suffered in silence. Her advocacy led to new bills. Producers filming in extreme zones would need certified medical staff, and cast members would have legal protection if they reported abuse. Then came the personal losses. In March 2023, her 20-year-old granddaughter Drew died unexpectedly. Cameras caught her sobbing, holding a framed photo, unable to film. Production halted for a full day, the only time that ever happened. That fall, the episode aired as a memorial. The heartbreak didn't stop. On July 15, 2025, Sue's mother, Nyoka, passed away at 85. Days later, Sue posted old letters from her mom revealing years of hidden abuse. She finally understood the silence, the coldness. Just months earlier, Sue had undergone major spinal surgery, fusing 3 vertebrae damaged from decades of lifting, hauling, and surviving. It cost $47,000. Her spine, doctors said, looked like it had been in car crashes, but it was just Alaska. Then came the end. On February 8, 2025, National Geographic announced they were canceling Life Below Zero after 23 seasons. Sue's final episode aired on March 22nd. In it, she bought a $150,000 backup cabin at Chenna Hot Springs, a move that proved prophetic when, just months later, the Munson Creek fire burned within 100 yards of the place. Her footage, frantically loading gear as flames closed in, became the most intense scene in years. Over 12,000 acres burned. Her cabin survived, but she didn't slow down. In October 2025, now 62, she teamed up with survival expert Michael Heinrich to turn Kavik into a wilderness school. Their bear survival intensive ran June to August. 8 sessions, 12 people per session, 5 days each. At $2,500 per person, the venture brought in about $400,000 annually. Despite more than 20 bone fractures over the years, Sue led each predator simulation herself. The deal was 60-40. She took the lion's share. Her 2024 memoir, Call of the Wild, sold 180,000 copies and hit number 3 on the New York Times list. In it, she told stories never aired, like the time in 2010 when 3 armed poachers camped 200 yards from her cabin, but she stayed hidden with a loaded rifle, snapping license plate photos from the shadows. Or the time she found a human skeleton near her property, a missing hiker from 2009. Hollywood came knocking, offering 6-figure deals for film rights. Still, a battle remains. The Alaska Department of Natural Resources wants to terminate her lease, citing $2,300 in unpaid fees and environmental concerns. She's poured $85,000 into fighting back. The state says she violated rules with unauthorized structures and too many guests during filming. She says her $340,000 in improvements actually protected the land better. Wilderness groups have raised $12,000 for her legal fight. The next big hearing is in March 2026. Final verdict expected by 2030.